Beyond the damage from the war itself, the rest of the world held its breath. That's because Russia still has over 5,000 nuclear warheads. About 4 days into the invasion of Ukraine, President Putin placed those nuclear weapons on what's called high alert. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists used something called the Doomsday Clock to tell the world how close we might be to a global catastrophe. With the tension in Ukraine and the weapons on high alert, it ticked over to 90 seconds to midnight, the closest we've ever been. Now imagine you live in a big city like London and you hear you might be the target of a nuclear attack. Would you stay put and risk being a target, or would you leave for the countryside where it might be safer? Do you save yourself, or do you stay for the matcha lattes? What you do depends on how likely you think the attack is. If you stay, it's because you think the risk of an attack is low enough that avoiding it entirely isn't worth the cost of uprooting your life and moving. As you know, matcha is not going to reach the countryside for another 6 to 8 months at best. These are the costs of self-preservation. In March following the invasion, panels of forecasting experts were saying the risk was less than a fraction of 1%. But can you really trust those forecasts? Experts have been so wrong in their predictions about the future. It's easy to think that the future is just unknowable. It's true that many people have been confident making predictions about the future that have never come true. There's an old Danish proverb, prediction is hard, especially about the future. Lots of risks have never materialized. Prior to the year 2000, many were terrified that the world's IT systems would fall apart because they stored the year using only 2-digit numbers and not 4. Even the US Deputy Secretary of Defense made dire warnings, saying the Y2K problem is the electronic equivalent of El Nino, and there will be nasty surprises all around the globe. Now, as you can probably tell, there wasn't a catastrophe. This problem was easier to fix than we anticipated, so it never eventuated. On the other hand, some things are harder than we anticipated, and they never eventuate. People have been predicting that we could use fusion power, like the sun does, to get clean, green, and unlimited energy. But there's another old joke that fusion power is 30 years away, and it always will be. I always say that I'm going to learn how to play the guitar next week, which I've been saying for about 6 years. Good session. So yeah, predictions are often wrong, and making accurate forecasts is really hard. But some people are actually really good at this. They can predict what will happen years in advance. These superforecasters can teach us how to become better forecasters ourselves. We know about these superforecasters because of the work of psychologists like Barbara Mellers and Philip Tetlock. Tetlock and Mellers have run dozens of forecasting tournaments over about 40 years. In these tournaments, they've worked with thousands of forecasters making millions of predictions. The team have even worked alongside the intelligence community, forecasters who have access to even classified information. With so many good forecasters and so many predictions, you can learn a lot. Can we learn to predict the future? Who can? When can they? And how can they do it? And if they can they teach me? Can they predict when I'll be able to do it? Will they forecast how accurate my forecast will be after they've taught me how to accurately forecast? The answer is probably. There were a few headline findings that seem consistent across their studies. First, not everyone is good at predicting the future. Some people were worse than chance, just flipping a coin. And lots of people were worse than just predicting that the world would stay exactly the same. These people who did poorly tended to be what Phil Tetlock described as hedgehogs, from the ancient Greek quote, "A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one big thing." In his books, Tetlock talks about people who have one big idea. Maybe they think that free markets will solve all problems, or that capitalism is destined to fail, or I'm going to be really good at guitar. Those people struggled to balance competing perspectives, weighing conflicting evidence. Using the language of this course, we might describe them as having a soldier mindset, more focused on fighting for their big belief than seeking the truth about what would actually happen. In contrast, some people were reliably excellent forecasters. These people kept doing well year after year, so they weren't just getting lucky. Tetlock described these people as foxes. They were much better at accounting for multiple perspectives. They had broad understandings about many fields. They were constantly changing their mind a little bit at a time, nudging their predictions up and down as new information came in. These people practiced, and that practice made perfect. Well, like almost perfect. They still got things wrong, but they were reliably better than 98% of other forecasters. We're not all going to be super forecasters, but Tetlock and Mellors showed us we can get better with some simple strategies. In one of their forecasting tournaments, they randomly assigned some people to get about an hour of training. Compared with the benefit of being a super forecaster, training improved your accuracy about 25%. This training won't make me Batman, but I can learn to be Robin, which is still pretty good, even if I can't pull off green tights. Or can I? I feel like I'm wearing nothing at all.
Nothing at all.
The training talks about doing back of the envelope calculations where you break big questions down into smaller, more feasible ones. It talks about doing a pre-mortem or a devil's advocate, looking at ways that you might be wrong. It talks about learning from others, being open to changing your mind. But the training also talks about one thing we haven't yet discussed in this course, which is using both the outside and the inside view. These two terms, the outside view and inside view, were developed by Nobel Prize winners Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and popularized in Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow. The inside view is your perspective based on your understanding of the details, kind of like the view from inside your head. The outside view ignores those details and just looks at the statistics of the most similar examples. If you're chatting with a friend and trying to predict which couples you know might get divorced, the outside view are the divorce statistics, 43% of people for their first marriage. Your inside view is your judgment based on each couple's idiosyncrasies. You know that Alice and Bob will never make it because she hates Bob's chewing. He even chews yogurt. Alice, on the other hand, rolls the toilet paper under and out like a total sociopath. Our inside view shows they're both doomed. If your charity is applying for a grant, the inside view is your judgment based on how great your idea is and how great it fits the funding scheme. It's easy to feel like you're like a 90% shot. But the outside view is the rate of success when you look at similar applications. Maybe lots of applications are great, so only 10% of great ones win money. This is called reference class forecasting. So instead of looking at how special and amazing your particular grant is, you look at the odds based on all of the grants similar to yours in the past. Our inside views are really biased, but the goal here isn't to only use the outside view. We instead start with the outside view, rather than starting with your initial, possibly biased inside view. The hard part is finding the most comparable reference class for your outside view. Imagine you're trying to forecast my odds of a heart attack. If I take that reference class that's too wide, like just men, then it won't be a specific enough case to be a useful reference class. I've never smoked, I eat pretty well, I'm under 40, and I exercise pretty regularly, so I'm probably at less risk than the average person. But how much less? You might instead take a narrower reference class. Middle-aged, physically active Brisbane men who have a weakness for almond croissants and a fondness for assessing their own risk of heart attack. But then you're back to only me, back to the inside view again. So instead, we should start with an outside view we can easily get numbers on, like 30 to 40-year-old men, and update just a little bit based on the exercise and the almond croissants. There is an art to this, which is why it helps to do all the other stuff like practice and working with others and devil's advocating our beliefs. Still, in general, our predictions are much more accurate if we start with the outside view and then update from there. For stuff like global events, a great outside view to start with is the opinion of a group of forecasters. There are lots of people who think really carefully about global events and have made public predictions. There are now amazing websites that pull together millions of predictions from thousands of forecasts. There's everything from whether China will invade Taiwan, whether cultured meat will ever become commercially viable, or whether we'll be able to colonize Mars. Most of these websites weigh people's predictions by how accurate these people have been in the past. This means we get the benefit of the wisdom of the crowd, but we also weigh more heavily the more accurate predictions. For some big things, we might defer to that crowd for the outside view. When you're trying to predict global events and there's thousands of people making these predictions, it's pretty hard to beat these websites. Like in the months leading up to the invasion of Ukraine, many TV pundits were saying it was all just posturing, that Putin would never be so stupid as to invade.
It sounds like it's happening.
I don't know what to believe.
I don't think Putin is going to invade.
There's something else going on here that feels very, very manufactured. I don't know what it is.
At the same time, the odds on these forecasting platforms eked closer to the truth. They slowly converged on the idea that Putin would invade, with an 80% probability in the week before the invasion. Now, predicting an 80% chance of something that happened a week later isn't perfect, but as we've learned from this course, we can't help but operate in a world full of uncertainty. We don't need to forecast everything in our lives and our careers, but when it really matters, it's worth getting an accurate forecast. I didn't need to check the weather forecast today, but I was checking it every hour leading up to my wedding.
It's fine, we've still got 5 minutes till start time.
As we've said elsewhere, choosing what to focus on is an important decision. When we're choosing what to focus on, we might look at the forecasts for what problems will be important. Humanity's made some pretty amazing progress over the last 200 years. We've lifted 1 billion people out of poverty, eliminated diseases like smallpox, and decided that pickleball is a real sport. But the forecast isn't good on some things that really matter. Forecasting platforms say there's a 30% chance of a nuclear weapon going off somewhere by 2035. They're predicting a 10% chance of another pandemic worse than COVID-19 before 2031. The chance of an AI malfunction killing either 100 people or doing $1 billion of damage before 2032 is about 80%. Those are some Terminator numbers. I find those numbers hard to look at or hard to believe. They feel outside my control, but if they're right, then bringing them down could be one of the most impactful things that we could do. The uncertainty makes things hard and scary, but it's not enough to say the situation's uncertain, so I'm not going to think about it. We'll never be able to predict everything with certainty, but we can learn to predict better than chance. By polishing our crystal ball and finding others whose forecasts we can trust, we can plan with a much clearer view of the future.